You asked about a shooting that we just had in Minneapolis, Minnesota. It was an act of domestic terrorism.
This is also a community on edge. There are roughly 80,000 Somalis living here in the area.
Minnesota is home to the largest Somali population in the country.
We learned today that the local Somali community says it's dealing with backlash from that investigation.
6:42 a.m., Street Paul, Minnesota. Temperature well below freezing. Streets of Southern District empty, save for exhaust plumes of 3 unmarked federal SUVs idling at the curb. Inside those vehicles sat 11 federal inspectors from FBI and Department of Health and Human Services. They weren't there for drug bust. They weren't there for fugitive hunt. On paper, this was routine compliance inspection of state-licensed child care center. The facility was run by Amina Farah Hassan, 5-year-old director with reputation that raised no suspicion. According to state records, she operated 5 separate child care centers in Twin Cities. Her files showed she was caring for more than 820 children every day. Because of these enrollment numbers, government subsidies arrived on time. State and federal agents had already raided similar facilities in South Minneapolis, businesses suspected of billing government quietly and reliably. Over 4 years, total amount paid to her network exceeded $2.8 billion. But when agents stepped out of vehicles and approached front door, building was silent. No parents dropping off kids, no noise, windows dark. What they found would expose $4.3 billion fraud network funding, largest drug factory in American history. 820 ghost children who never existed. $2.8 billion laundered through CJNG cartel. 61 captives with fingerprints burned off with acid. 32 tons of fentanyl produced daily. Want to know how they stole money meant for hungry children? Tap like. I'll reveal everything. Lead inspector keyed lock and pushed open front door. Air inside was stale and cold. Space felt wrong immediately. Toys sat on shelves arranged in perfect rows, covered by thin layer of undisturbed dust. Cribs were fully assembled in nursery, but mattresses were pristine. They had never been slept in. Attendance sheets were posted on wall, carefully filled out in blue ink. Every box was checked, every name was accounted for. Yet room itself had never known life. This single center had received more than $46 million in taxpayer subsidies over the last 12 months, yet there was no evidence that single child had ever spent full day there. Inside director's private office, investigators found proof of deception. On desk lay heavy binder containing fraudulent roster of more than 700 children. As agents flipped through pages, they realized sophistication of scheme. These weren't just random names. Network had created synthetic identities. They utilized real social security numbers purchased on dark web, paired with falsified birth certificates manufactured in backroom print shop. They had created an army of ghost children who existed solely in state's payment database.
The Trump administration says it is now withholding all federal child care funding to the entire state. The agency says the state receives $185 million for 19,000 children, and now that money will be gone. And the agency did not specify any alternate plans for families who will be affected.
But true horror was in steel safe bolted to floor in corner of room. When forensic locksmith forced it open, they didn't just find ledgers. They found $38 million in cash, shrink-wrapped in black plastic. Sitting on top of money were 5 heavy packages stamped with specific insignia, scorpion logo of CJNG cartel. At that moment, inspectors realized this wasn't just welfare fraud. This wasn't just someone skimming off top. This was money laundering terminal for transnational criminal organization. Amina Farah Hassan wasn't running daycare. She was running bank for cartel, funded entirely by American taxpayers. If you believe stealing money meant for hungry children is crime against humanity, hit like button and comment justice below. Inspection had turned into crime scene. By mid-morning, federal auditors began pulling deep records tied to facilities' licensing numbers. What they found violated every standard of logic. Files showed that Samira Abdi Hassan, relative listed as co-director, was managing multiple sites simultaneously. Birth dates for children overlapped.
The latest allegations add to a growing list of fraud investigations in Minnesota. So far, 92 people have been charged, including 82 Somali Americans.
Home addresses were duplicated across different cities. Yet from 2021 to 2025, total reimbursements for network reached $2.8 billion. In some months, deposits exceeded $74 million. Money was routed through 43 intermediary accounts before being redistributed. Less than 4% of funds could be tied to legitimate operating expenses like food, rent, or payroll. There were no food supply contracts, no maintenance costs. Instead, numbers told different story. Funds were wired overseas in batches. Each transfer kept just below federal reporting threshold. $312 million was processed in less than 9 months through single account that never paid single employee. Money was moving to East Africa, Middle East, and shell companies in Mexico. This operation didn't survive because it was hidden. It survived because it looked normal. Behind perfectly completed forms was financial machine draining billions. Investigators discovered network had executed elaborate theater operations to fool neighbors. They found schedule in Amina's digital files labeled simulation shifts. It detailed rotations for actors hired to park cars in lot during drop-off hours. They even installed outdoor speakers hidden in bushes that played pre-recorded audio tracks of children laughing and playing on loop during day. They maintained fleet of used car seats that were moved between vehicles to make parents look legitimate. It was Hollywood-level production designed for audience of one, state inspector. By evening, course of investigation shifted from audit to manhunt. Comment expose if you believe this required corrupt officials looking other way. At 11:58 p.m., federal prosecutors issued authorization for coordinated operation. This was no longer inspection, it was sweep. Within minutes, teams mobilized across Minneapolis. All 5 child care facilities owned by Network were raided simultaneously. Additional 12 affiliated offices were breached.
The State Department of Children, Youth, and Families, who licenses child care centers, didn't comment either.
As teams moved through buildings, alarms began triggering across financial network. Money started moving fast. In less than 18 minutes, more than $96 million was frantically rerouted through financial tunnels designed to collapse once activated. Someone on other end knew feds were inside. Then confirmation arrived that turned operation into pursuit. Surveillance systems recorded Amina Farah Hassan leaving her residence hours earlier. License plate readers tracked her vehicle heading south. Maritime records showed private vessels scheduled to depart before dawn. She was running. But investigation led to darker location. By 2:18 a.m., analysts tracing encrypted communications identified hub 30 miles outside city.
FBI Director Kash Patel promised a surge of resources to investigate, and lawmakers in the House are expanding their own investigation.
It was industrial property listed as abandoned. Tax records showed no activity for years. But utility records told different story. Electricity usage at abandoned sites surged every night. Water consumption exceeded 90,000 gallons per day. At 3:36 a.m., aerial surveillance confirmed movement. Vehicles were entering compound in timed intervals. Exhaust plumes rose from multiple vents. This wasn't warehouse, it was factory. And it was being funded by money stolen from Minnesota's children. At 12:21 a.m., final order was given. Objective was entry. Floodlights cut through darkness as tactical teams moved toward compound's main access points. Structure didn't resemble warehouse anymore. It resembled fortified installation. First breach came quietly. Controlled charge peeled back steel door. Inside, air wasn't just hot, it was toxic. Agents reported metallic taste in their mouths moment seals were broken. Walls were lined with industrial scrubbers running at full capacity to hide chemical signature from thermal satellites. Conveyor belts continued to move. Output counters ticked forward. But behind secondary corridor, agents found human cost of operation.
Insist because of alleged fraud in Minnesota, they're feeling the backlash on social media, seeing less business in their stores, and insist some retailers just too afraid to open their doors.
In dim holding room, they found 61 individuals. 17 were American citizens. Others were from multiple countries. Several had been reported missing 6 to 9 months earlier. They were seated on floor, malnourished and terrified. One man's pulse registered barely above 40 beats per minute. And workers? They weren't just captives, they were ghosts. Their fingerprints had been burned off with acid to prevent identification if they ever escaped. This was cartel's insurance policy against human element. Stay with this video if you support federal agents risking lives to sever arteries of networks like this. While rescue teams extracted captives, evidence teams advanced to production floor. What they found stunned seasoned officers. This facility was using stolen child care funds to purchase precursor chemicals. Ledgers showed purchases exceeding $1.4 billion over 18 months. Factory was producing 32 to 38 tons of fentanyl per day alongside over 70 tons of cocaine per week. It was closed loop, government-paid daycare centers, Daycare centers washed money. Money funded drug factory. Drugs destroyed community. By 4:19 a.m., scale became undeniable. Production floors extended across 4 levels. One line item listed single week's output valued at over $3.2 billion. As dawn approached, compound was fully under control. Silence that followed was heavy. At 10:26 a.m., federal briefings began in secured building. Total confirmed financial loss to taxpayers stood at over $4.3 billion. That figure represented assistance that never reached people it was intended to protect. Investigators estimated that more than 68,000 low-income children across state had lost access to child care because funds had been diverted to this criminal network. Legitimate child care providers had closed because they couldn't compete with fraud ring that didn't have to pay for food or staff. In some neighborhoods, licensed child care capacity fell by nearly 22%. System had not been blind. It had chosen not to look. Approvals had become automated. Oversight had become procedural. In system built for efficiency, repetition was mistaken for reliability. This case forces a hard look at vulnerability of American welfare system. For years, focus has been on accessibility, getting money to people fast. But speed killed verification. Ghost Child Network exploited very compassion that defines system. They knew that bureaucrats are afraid to ask hard questions. They weaponized political correctness to steal billions. Investigation into Amina Farah Hassan proved that most dangerous threats don't always look like criminals. Sometimes they look like pillars of community. They follow rules, they file paperwork, and they steal future right out from under us. Factory is shut down, money is frozen. But question remains. How many other facilities are sitting empty right now, collecting millions while children go without? This is not an isolated incident. This is warning. Networks like this operate because systems prioritize speed over scrutiny. Perfect paperwork kills questions. Automation replaces judgment. Lesson is uncomfortable but unavoidable. When trust replaces verification, when routine replaces oversight, when silence replaces accountability, evil doesn't need shadows. It needs forms filled out correctly. Minnesota crossed threshold long before raids began. Crossing happened when trust replaced verification, when routine replaced oversight, when silence replaced action. Hit like so this investigation reaches communities where fraud like this still operates. Comment accountability if you believe systems must prove trust, not assume it. Share this with someone who thinks welfare fraud is victimless crime. They need to see how it funds cartels and destroys communities. Subscribe for updates on trial, additional arrests, and systemic reforms. Fight continues, and it needs you to speak.